This is Clay Rooks at City College, and today I want to talk to you about the process of writing. You know, when they interview the CEOs of the Fortune 500 companies every year, they ask them, what's the most important skill that someone you hire can have? And what they've answered at number one for the last 25 years has been communication skills. They want people who can write and speak well. That's what they're looking for primarily. You may think, well, it's a college degree. That's true, it may go along with it. But the person they actually hire has the best communication skills. So I want to show you a step-by-step approach that's used by professionals. That's a pretty easy process that they use in writing documents and papers of all kinds. I think it'll help you quite a bit. The first thing that you need to do if you're going to go into a project of any kind is to think. The next step in the process is to gather information. We're going to talk about these in a little more detail here as we go, but I want to lay them out for you first. The third step is to create a thesis. After you do that, you need to know what your purpose is and also to consider who your audience is going to be. Then you need to organize your information, write a draft, revise your draft, do the format and the proofreading, and then finalize your paper. So the first part of the process is to think. Well, what should you be thinking about? Now, you've probably had the situation in school before where your teacher says, go write a paper, and you're thinking, well, what am I going to write about? I don't know. What am I going to say? However, in professional life, this will not be a problem. You'll go into the office, and your boss will call you in, and she'll say, last week we sent you to the Comdex show. On Thursday, I want your report. And on Friday, you're doing the presentation before the board. So you know what it is you're supposed to be doing. You don't have to think up anything. All right? So the question to, what do I think, is think about your topic, the subject. What are you going to be working on or writing about? The second step in the process is to gather information. Now this just makes common sense. You can't give somebody information if you don't have information. So logically, the second step is to gather some information. Now, where do you get the information? Well, where most people start is they brainstorm the topic. They think, what do I know about this? What can, maybe what knowledge I already have. And the way most people do this is they brainstorm, they make notes. If they find out there's information they don't have, they do some research or maybe an interview. Now, if you were smart when you went to the Comdex show, you spent some time gathering the CDs and the brochures and stuff from the other companies and stuff that were there, and that's your research. So you can look up stuff. Also, you can go on the internet and look up information you know. There's all kinds of incredible online libraries and information now you can go to. Also, remember that you can speak to people. They're the best source of information a lot of times. If you're trying to figure out something, but your specialty maybe is marketing, but there's a question about the engineering of this thing, well, instead of trying to find it on the internet, just go down to the engineering section of your company there and, talk to Susan. She's an engineer. She probably has the answer. So ask people if you need information. All right? Now, you need to gather as much information as possible. The rule of thumb is usually to have 3 times as much information as you ever end up using. Now, this might sound kind of strange to you. It's like, why do I need that much information? Well, the reason for that is that a lot of the information you will gather, you'll find out, is repetitive. It's like, I already knew that. And some of the information, frankly, won't be useful because that's not what I'm talking about. And so you need to have a lot of information to be able to pick from it the best information and the most useful information. Now, before you go on past this step, you need to check for some of what we call the essential information. These are called the 5 W's plus H, sometimes known as the reporter's questions. And you remember what those are. It's the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Now, you need to know this for all the aspects of whatever it is that you're talking about. For example, think of the way that news stories are written. All right? In the first paragraph, they tell you all this basic information of some kind. They say something like, last night San Francisco was playing so-and-so. They were in this city. This happened. This was the score. This is why it happened. This is how come they won or lost or whatever. But all that information, the basic information, is in the first paragraph. All right? However, if you have this problem that some people have where, hey, it's not that I'm a bad writer, but it's like I write a paragraph or two and then I don't know what to say. The problem you're having is that you don't gather enough information. You can't just have the who, what, where, when, why, and how for the basic information. You need this for every aspect of your information that you're going to be working on. You need every aspect covered, and then you have lots of information to work with. So make sure that you gather all the information. Before you move to the next step, though, always make sure that you have this information for every aspect of whatever it is you're working on. The next thing to do then is to create a thesis. Now, this is the one that throws a lot of people. The reason for that is the way that a lot of school teachers teach students what a thesis is. Because what do they tell them it is? Most of the time they'll tell them something like, it's the main idea. Now, this is correct. A thesis is the main idea. But that doesn't tell you how to create one. Writers think of a thesis as two pieces of information. It's a topic or a subject plus tell me either what's your position on it, what's your point of view on it, or what's your opinion of it. I need to know those things, all right? So two pieces of information. What's the topic? What's your position or opinion? Let me give you an example. Capital punishment should be legal, or capital punishment should be illegal. Now, it doesn't matter what the opinion is, legal or illegal in this case. You just have to have one, all right? So, when we look at that, we see that what we have here is one simple sentence. And your thesis should not really be more than that. You should state it in a simple sentence. Simply tell me your topic and what your position or opinion of that topic is. In this case, it is the topic is capital punishment. The opinion or the position is it should be legal or should be illegal, whichever that you're going for. All right? So write your thesis down in one simple sentence and hold on to it. All right? Now, the next thing that you need to do, the next step is to know what your purpose is. So what's your purpose in doing this? All right? Now, your tendency is go, well, I'm doing it because I was assigned to do it. That's not what we mean by purpose. All right? Your purpose means one of these things. All right? Your purpose is to do what? Is it to inform somebody of information they don't have? To explain something to them they don't know but need to know? Or is it more to persuade or convince them to, see it your way? Let me give you an example of purpose here. Example. My purpose is to persuade people that capital punishment should be illegal. All right? I want you to notice that the purpose is built from the thesis. All right? The thesis, one possibility was capital punishment should be illegal. All right? So what your purpose is then is to persuade people that it should be illegal. All right? It's important to know what your purpose is, and it's related to your thesis, and you should also write that down in a single sentence and hold on to it. Now, the next thing that you want to do in this process is to consider who your audience is. Well, you might ask yourself, why does audience matter? Well, let me give you an example of this. Let's say that you're at the college, you're out in the parking lot, and you're backing out of a space, and somebody comes along and whap, little fender bender. Okay? Now, if this is a factual event that happened, why is it that your explanation for what happened changes? Like, say you're talking to your parents about it, and it was unfortunately their car, and it's like, oh no, it wasn't my fault. I didn't. Okay, hopefully it wasn't. All right. How is that different than when you had to explain it to the police officer? Just like, oh no, sir, it wasn't. You know, they came around the corner and they tagged me, and all right. Or considering it's not your fault, and that evening you're down at the the local coffee shop or whatever with your friends, say, oh well, I came around the corner, whap this. Now, considering that the factual information was presented the same, what was it that changed about this? What changed was the audience. That's what changed, all right? So you need to ask yourself a couple of questions then about the audience. For example, who will be reading this document, or maybe seeing this if it's a PowerPoint or something? And what is it that I need to know about them? What is it that you need to know about an audience to know how to approach them? All right? Well, here's a couple of considerations. All right? The first one would be the age of your audience. Think about this. You explain things differently probably to maybe your grandparents than you do to, say, your kid sister, right? And another consideration you might want to make with audience would be gender. So you're telling me that men and women think differently? Yes, I'm telling you that men and women think differently. All right? Men tend to communicate by giving factual information. And this is one of the things that, kind of makes women crazy about them, because they don't really converse. All right? On the other hand, women tend to communicate relationally. It's the communication is a relationship function, and it's the communication itself is almost as important as what the content is. All right? So what I'm telling you here that they've learned about communication is that guys, you need to do more in your communication than just give facts. And women, you need to usually, when you're doing this kind of thing, pull back a little bit on the relational aspects and make sure that all of the content is there that needs to be there as well. All right? Another consideration is education. Now, by education, we don't just mean the level of education. Because, for example, most of the people you'll work with in professional life will be college graduates like yourself. However, the field that they're expert in actually is the most important consideration. For example, if you're working in a fair-sized company, as we said before, maybe you're in marketing, but there's also engineers there, there's accountants there, that kind of thing. You probably already realize that people in different professions actually speak a little differently. They have little different languages and stuff that they use that other people don't use. Where it's probably easiest seen where most of you are in college right now is think of the guys who are deep into computers. A lot of times they use words and language that nobody else but them understands. All right? This is kind of this thing that is similar when you get into professional life. For example, engineers use words that accountants never use. People in marketing use language that managers don't use, that kind of thing. So you have to take that into consideration. Another thing you want to take into consideration with an audience is the culture that they come from, and with that it will include religious considerations as well. Let me give you an example of this. Most of you probably are aware that some years ago, I believe it was Chevy, tried to sell a car down in Mexico. And the car was the Nova. And they expected it to be a big seller. And it wasn't. Matter of fact, they had a real struggle with that and lost a lot of money trying to market that car down there. Well, what was the reason for that? Well, the reason is that somebody didn't do their cultural homework. Because in Spanish, there's a term that kind of sounds like nova, and what it means is no go. So if you're trying to market a car and its name is no go, that's a problem. All right? You need to really look at people's culture when you're trying to relate to them and see how their culture does things. All right. What does considering your audience actually do then? What it does is it changes your language level. All right? It changes the words you use and the way you use them both. Now, this is something you do automatically when you communicate by speaking anyway without even thinking about it. But you do it subconsciously. What you have to learn to do when you're in the writing process is to do it on purpose. It takes a lot longer to explain it than it does to do it. It only takes about 5 seconds to do it when you're preparing a project or a document or something. Just stop and think, okay, who's my audience? You know, what's their age, their education, culture, whatever seems to matter. Think about it. Once you get that kind of in your mind, then your mind will subconsciously start setting the language level for you, and you won't even have to think about it again. But you do need to make that initial consideration, who's going to be seeing this. If you do that, then it'll kind of set the language for you. Now, the next step in the process is to organize your information. This is another one that's hard for some people because of the way they've been taught. All right? It's easiest if you break organization down into 3 sub-steps. The first sub-step is to edit. Now, some of you are going, hold it, what do you mean edit? I haven't even written anything yet. That's absolutely correct. Professionals edit their information before they write it. Why write things that you don't need or use? All right? Let me try to give you a picture of this. Let's say you got a bunch of information here, all right? This represents different types of information, and you got lots of information here, all right? Now, what you need to do is edit your information. In other words, get rid of what you don't need. Now, your question might be, well, how do I know what that is? Okay, what you do is you look back at your thesis. Your thesis says, this is my topic, and this is my opinion of it, or this is my position on it. So you look at your thesis, you look at the information. If you see information that doesn't match the thesis, it's not either really on the topic or it doesn't match the position you're taking, you get rid of it. Okay? On the other hand, all right, also look at your purpose, because your purpose determines actually the approach you're going to take with your information, because the language you use to try to convince somebody of something is different than the language you use if you're just passing on the information. All right? So look at your thesis and look at your purpose, and so go through your information and get rid of what doesn't match that. All right? Now, so we've edited our information some. Now notice over here where it says data on the side over here and it's underlined. I've got a piece of information there and I'm not sure whether I'm going to use it or not. What should I do? Well, the answer is, at this point, keep the information. You can always throw it out later, but if you throw it out now, you'll probably forget it, and then it'll be gone. All right? So remember, to figure out how to edit your information, look at your thesis and look at your purpose statements that you wrote down previously, and whatever information matches them, keep. Whatever doesn't, don't. All right? Now, the second step in organizing your information after you edit it is to group the information. All right? Now, you might say, well, how do I know what kind of groups to put it in? All right? The way you do that is you put related information together. And you have to determine what that is, because it depends what your topic is and what your approach is and what you're writing about. All right? But maybe if you're writing about that paper on capital punishment or whatever, all right, then, this group of information is about, the type of crimes that people commit that leads to capital punishment. And maybe, this over here deals with certain judgments that are given to people. And maybe this over here is methods of capital punishment or whatever. But you figure out, what information is related, and then you put it in the same groups, which I've tried to represent here with you with A, B, C, D. All right? These each are some type of information group that goes together. All right? In other words, everything under A is about the same subtopic. It's about types of crimes or something that go with capital punishment. All right? Now, the third step that you do is to do an outline. Now, most of you have learned to do this type of outline. See this thing here with the formal? This is known as a formal outline. However, for the most part, forget about that. Professionals do not use these except in two circumstances. One, if you have an incredible amount of information, so you really need to break it down. Or two, if the information you're dealing with is very complex, and so it has to be broken down into really small parts for people to be able to follow it. Or if you're writing a really big research paper, you may have to use a formal outline. However, for about 90% of everything else you do, you can simply use a 1, 2, 3 scratch outline. All you do is decide, what am I going to talk about first? What am I going to talk about second? What am I going to talk about third? And all you do then is plug your groups of information into this scratch outline, which in that case will look kind of like this. You have your groups of information, you pull in your scratch outline, and then you put the information where it goes. It's like, well, I want to talk about the information in group B first, and then D, A, C, E. This is not, the B, D, A, C, E is not the way it'll always turn out. You determine what group gets talked about first, second, third, and which one has to be, the concluding information. That's something that you need to decide as you're working on your project. All right? So then what you do, after you have a scratch outline figured, just a simple 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, this has 5 because there were 5 groups of information. If you have more groups of information, then of course you'll have more numbers. All right? Now, the next thing you do with your scratch outline, all right, you have your scratch outline right here. This is what we determined the groups of information are going to go in this order. Now, the way this converts into a document or a presentation is like this. You see, this is kind of like a stack of blocks. And you're going, well, what's that? All right. Well, the answer is it's whatever you need it to be. If you're writing a paper, then these are paragraph blocks. If you're writing a research paper, perhaps each one of these is a separate section. If you're writing a book, these could be the chapters. All right. In this example, we're writing a paper. So here's what it'll look like. All right. First block will be introduction. And then we have paragraphs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a conclusion. All right? And then we plug in the information. All right? Paragraph 1 will be information B. Paragraph 2 will be information D, and so on. All right? Now, you take this scratch outline that you've already figured out. It's all laid out for you. And the next thing that you do is you write a draft. All right? So, here's your scratch outline you've already figured out. What you do now is you convert that to paragraphs. And now writing should be actually pretty easy because all you're really doing is transcribing information that you've already gathered into sentences and paragraphs. So here's an example of your introductory paragraph. Okay? And so you just write it out a paragraph at a time. Now, at this stage, you don't want to stop and make any other considerations. The idea of writing a draft is simply to get the information down on paper in the most correct order that you can. You should not be stopping to check spelling or punctuation or anything like that. Why not? Well, because what happens if you stop? Go, oh, I think I misspelled that word, and you stop. You go look it up, you get distracted, you lose your train of thought. All right? The idea of a draft is simply to get the information on paper. You can go back and correct it later. Don't stop. Try to sit down and write it through in one sitting if you can. Get away where you're quiet and unbothered if possible and write it out. All right? You say, well, I can't do that for something like a research paper. It's too long. That's true, but you can write each section at a time by itself and then put them together later. Now, after you write your draft, the next step is to revise your draft. This is where you go in and start cleaning it up. All right? And so here's an example of cleaning up that paragraph. I've cut some words in the front of it. I changed some wording around inside it to try to make it better. Now, of course, you wouldn't print this with these italicized. I just did that so you could see the changes that I did when I revised it. And I'd go through and revise, of course, the whole paper at one time. All right? And you may have to do this once or twice, but this should not be an endless process. If you've been taught years ago that, oh, the way writers work is they write something and then they rewrite it, 12 times and it somehow magically turns out wonderful, that's not true. That's not the way professionals work. Now, maybe, yes, people who write novels and stuff like that do, but working people and writers don't work that way. If we did, you wouldn't see a newspaper for a week, okay? The way we do it is like this process here, basically. And you should never have to revise your draft if you set it up properly more than a couple of times, and it should turn out pretty good. Now, the next step is to format and to proofread your paper. All right? When we're talking format, we're talking about now it's time to do things like check the margins, make sure I'm using the right margins. Line spacing, you remember in a paper everything's supposed to be double spaced. I've got the right kind of paragraph and page layout, documentation style. If you're especially writing a college paper, they have to either be MLA style or APA style. Or if you're working in your profession, different professions have different layouts for different types of documents. All right? And you'll learn those if you get into a profession, but you have to make sure that you follow it and do it. And any other special features or conventions that you need to follow to get your paper in the right format. You also need to proofread. You need to check for spelling, capitalization, punctuation, grammar, the style, all those basic things. Now with computerized word processing, this is pretty easy. Don't forget to use the spell check and the grammar check, but also read it yourself. There's no substitute for checking it over yourself and making sure it's right. The last step then is to finalize your paper, finish your drafts and your proofreading and all that, and then get it in format and then print it. Now if you do that, look, it should look kind of like this. That's pretty good. Now this one is MLA college style, but that's what it would look like. It's looking like a pretty good paper. It even reads pretty good. That's what we're going for, okay? All right. Now, the most important thing about the process actually is following the process, all right? Remember what the steps are in the process. Every now and then I get someone who will tell me that, oh, I was following the process and then it didn't seem to work or something. Well, what I find out happened is that they got a little pressed for time or something and they were going along great, but they got down to like step 3 and then they jumped over to step 7. That won't work. It's a process. You have to do the process and in the order that it is here. If you will take the time to do this step-by-step process, you will learn it actually fairly quickly. I mean, think of it like this, okay? Think about when you learned to do something like drive. How much time did it take you when you were first learning to drive? You got in the car, you put on your seat belt, you checked your mirrors, you did all this stuff, all right? Now how do you do it? most of us have been driving for a few years. I mean, we jump in, we go. All right? This will become like that for you as the more you do it. Writing is a practicum. The more you do it, the easier it'll get for you, and it'll become second nature for you if you will learn to follow this process. And it will work. I have students have come back to me every year and say, man, that process worked great. Oh, by the way, I found out it also worked for writing speeches. It worked for making presentations. It works if I follow the process. And it will. Now remember, this is a lot to remember. But if you need to review this, you can go to the Quick College Guide into chapters 7 and 8 and review all of these steps. Well, I hope that helps you out. I'll talk with you later.